Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a deeply complex, truly chilling case from Siberia back in 1989 that took a staggering 14 years to resolve. It's a story that absolutely shook Russia, forcing us to look at the absolute darkest corners of human behavior and systemic corruption. We're going to break down exactly what happened here, step by step, straight from the historical record.
To really wrap our heads around this mystery, we first need to set the scene in Kazynet. Picture this. A village so isolated it barely exists on a map. We're talking 0 roads, 0 shops, surrounded by deep, dark forests and a population of exactly 24 railway worker family members. That is it. The houses were scattered, and the literal only connection to the outside world was a single railway line. By August, those mountain nights are already getting freezing cold, and after 9 p.m., this heavy, unsettling silence would just blanket the entire village.
All right, let's jump right into Chapter 1, The Grisly Discovery.
Here's how that night unfolded. You got total darkness by 9 p.m., and a group of boys scheduled to catch a train home around 10:40. Flash forward to 1:40 a.m., 2 highly experienced freight train drivers, brothers Vadim and Igor Suproniko, are driving this massive, fully loaded 70-car train. Suddenly, they spot something on the tracks ahead. Vadim blasts the horn, slams on the emergency brakes, but, a train that heavy, there's just no way it's stopping in time. They hear that horrifying, unmistakable sound of steel wheels crushing something underneath.
So the drivers grab their lanterns and step down, probably hoping they just hit a wild animal, right? But no, it's a complete nightmare. They find the dismembered bodies of these 7 15-year-old boys. This was a tight-knit group of friends from a small community called Mezherechinsk. They played football together, went to school together, and they had just been on a fun weekend trip collecting cedar cones in the forest. And now, the drivers are frantically radioing in this horrific scene.
Which brings us straight to Section 2, the impossible police theory. Okay, look at these two sides, because massive red flags pop up immediately. The local police show up, and incredibly fast, they rule it a tragic accident. They claim the boys got lost, got exhausted, and just fell asleep on the cold steel tracks. But the families and the train drivers are looking at this going, absolutely not. For one, who literally sleeps through a blaring freight train horn without even flinching? And even wilder, the boys' backpacks were found 250 meters away, arranged in this deliberate, neat little line. Like someone very intentionally staged them there.
And some reporters tried to float these careless theories about a suicide pact, or maybe the kids were drunk, but medical science shut that down fast. 0 traces of alcohol, 0 drugs. These were healthy, athletic kids with loving families and absolutely no reason to be lying motionless on a train track. But local authorities just ignored all of that, quietly swept it under the rug, closed the case, and the boys were buried.
Refusing to accept that impossible story leads us to Chapter 3, Reopening the Cold Case.
Imagine fighting for 2 whole years while the local police literally ignore your calls and conveniently start losing crucial evidence. But these parents, they did not back down. In 1991, right in the middle of the Soviet Union collapsing, they shoot a desperate letter straight to Russian President Boris Yeltsin. And miraculously, it actually lands on the right desk. The Prosecutor General's office reopens the case and sends in Vladimir Guzenkov and Yuri Stolyarov. These are elite Moscow detectives, the guys you call when a case is impossible.
By the time these detectives actually get to Kazynet, the weather has wiped out all the physical evidence, and the locals are giving them absolutely nothing. Everyone claims they just magically slept through the whole thing. But as they go door to door, they keep hearing this one fascinating name pop up, Vasily. And where is Vasily? He's already sitting in prison for murdering his own brother Slava. Detective Vladimir immediately senses a connection here.
Pulling that single loose string brings us to Part 4, Confessions and Exhumations.
So Vladimir visits Vasily in prison, and Vasily starts talking, giving this tangled, partial confession. But Vladimir knows he cannot trust a single word of the original local police reports to verify it. So he makes a really tough call. He orders a highly sensitive exhumation of the 7 boys. And they have to do this under the cover of deep, pitch-black darkness just to bypass any local corruption. They bring the bodies back up so a brand new, untainted forensic team can finally look for the real truth.
And the data doesn't lie. These new autopsies completely shattered the accident theory. The boys had severe skull fractures, broken jaws, deep torso wounds. And when the forensic experts tested these specific injuries on dummies, they found a perfect match with heavy tools found only in a railway depot. It proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that these boys were brutally attacked and murdered well before they were ever placed on those tracks.
With that undeniable forensic proof, we finally arrive at Chapter 5,
The truth of that night.
Watch how Vasily's story morphs under the weight of this evidence. First, he tries to claim it was just him and his scrawny brother Yuri who killed all 7 athletic teenagers. Yeah, right? Vladimir knows that's physically impossible. At least one kid would have bolted. Then Vasily tries blaming his dead brother, Slava. Finally, the pressure breaks him. Vasily exposes the real masterminds: a visiting senior police lieutenant named Nikolai and a local lineman.
Detective Vladimir immediately drags the lineman in for a grueling interrogation, and the guy finally cracks. The whole ugly truth spills out. That night, a group of guys, including Lieutenant Nikolai, were heavily drinking out of sheer boredom. The booze runs out, so they go wandering around looking for marijuana. Instead, they stumble onto the boys waiting for their 10:40 train. A stupid dispute breaks out, supposedly because the boys were messing with a signal wire, though honestly that was never even proven, and things escalate way out of control.
And this is where it gets truly sickening. Lieutenant Nikolai, a literal police officer sworn to protect people, hits one of the boys with the butt of his gun. Panicking about his career, Nikolai orders his drunken friends to just massacre all the boys to eliminate the witnesses. The kids couldn't run because Nikolai was pointing his service weapon right at them. Then, using his insider knowledge as a cop, Nikolai meticulously orchestrates this whole cover-up, laying the bodies on the tracks and staging the backpacks to fake an exhaustion accident.
The truth is finally out in the open, but brace yourselves for Section 6, a flawed final justice.
Look at this timeline, because it is just mind-boggling. In 1995, after this massive trial, the killers actually get death sentences. But then, geopolitics steps in. In 1996, Russia joins the Council of Europe, meaning they have to adopt European human rights standards and suspend the death penalty. The Supreme Court overturns the sentences. And because of these massive legal delays and loopholes, the killers aren't just spared the death penalty, they are released back into society, completely free. Unbelievable.
And it gets worse. This is a shocking institutional failure. Nikolai, the literal mastermind behind a mass murder, actually gains political power and becomes a municipal deputy leader. Meanwhile, back in Kazynet, witnesses start turning up dead. Vasily violently attacks his own cousin to shut him up. Vasily's brother Yuri is found suffocated. Another lineman who helped move the bodies, mysteriously murdered on the exact same train tracks. They were just systematically silencing anyone who knew anything.
But the families? They still would not quit. They petitioned again in 1999, forcing another grueling 4-year investigation. Hundreds of new interviews, 5 new forensic reviews. Finally, in 2003, the Supreme Court hands down these sentences. 10 years for Nikolai, 10 for the lineman, 7 for Vasily. Now for the families, these incredibly light sentences felt like a massive slap on the wrist, a deep injustice. But it did do one crucial thing. It permanently and officially put on the record that this was a murder, not an accident.
14 years. Think about that. Through a collapsing Soviet empire, insanely corrupt local cops, and a deeply broken legal system, these parents stood like an absolute rock for their kids. Their unbreakable resilience is the literal only reason the horrific reality of the Kazynet cover-up was ever dragged into the light.
So I want to leave you with this to chew on as we wrap up this explainer. What happens to a community when the protectors are actually the predators? The lasting scars of systemic corruption, they don't just magically disappear when a verdict is finally read in court. I highly encourage you to look deeper into the incredible resilience of these families and just think about the sheer courage it takes to speak truth to power. Thanks for joining me on this one.